Welcome, everyone. Good evening. My name is Priya Natarajan. I'm an astrophysicist, and I'm the current director of the Franke program in Science and the Humanities. We are delighted to host today's event that represents the confluence, literally, of art and science. We will see a wonderful story unfold on screen, the story of the Lost Leonardo, and we have the absolute pleasure of the protagonist, the artist and conservator, Professor Dianne Modestini, in the audience with us today. And she will be speaking at the end of the showing of this documentary. And we'll have a wonderful conversation and Q&A from all of you. And we're also delighted, following the documentary, to have one of our own, Dr. Irma Passeri, who will be joining this discussion. Before I start, I would like to thank our benefactors, Mr. and Mrs. Richard and Barbara Franke, for making possible not just this flagship interdisciplinary program at Yale, but many other events and activities that cross disciplinary boundaries and enable new innovative conversations across silos in the academic setting. I'm required to give you this notice that this event is being recorded, photographed for educational, archival, and promotional purposes, including use in print, on the internet, and other forms of media. By attending this event today, you agree to the possibility of your voice or likeness captured by these means and used for such purposes without compensation to you, and hereby waive any related rights of privacy or publicity. So I also want to remind you, following the event, we will have a reception upstairs in the student lounge, room 131, immediately afterward. So on to today's wonderful speaker, Dianne Dwyer Modestini. She's a clinical professor in the CRESS program in Paintings and Conservation, emerita at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts. She's an internationally renowned conservator of master and 19th century paintings. She received a BA in art history from Barnard in 1968. After graduation, she spent a year in Florence, where she studied drawing at the Accademia delle Belle Arti and Italian. In later years, she was to return often to this beloved city, where in 1996 she began and directed the restoration program at the Villa La Pietra. She's on the board of the Fondazione Roberto Longhi in Florence. She obtained an MA and a certificate of advanced study in art conservation from the State University of New York. She was appointed the assistant conservator of paintings at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where she was responsible for the collection of American paintings in the preparation of the reopening of the American wing. Ms. Modestini was engaged by the Samuel Kress Foundation in 1983 to undertake a comprehensive survey of Kress paintings that had been donated to 18 museums around the United States in 1961 under the foundation's regional gallery program. In the late 1980s, she initiated a pilot class combining the results of her ongoing survey of the dispersed Kress collection and her new role as an educator. The success of the class led to the launch of the Samuel H. Kress program in Paintings and Conservation in 1989. The purpose of I want to tell you a little bit about this program because it's incredibly unique. The purpose of the Kress program is to provide students with an opportunity to complete the study and restoration of a painting under the guidance of Ms. Modestini, assisted by a Kress Fellow, a young professional conservator, in the context of an advanced treatment class. And this is what is in store as a treat for those of us science geeks as well, who love art and are science geeks. With the progress of instrumental analysis and the burgeoning interest in the study of materials and techniques amongst art historians, the course has expanded to include many technical topics, including the study of polarized light microscopy and cross-sectional analysis of paint samples to identify pigments and non-destructive identification of their constituents with X-ray fluorescence and SEM-EDS, imaging with the ultraviolet, digital X-ray radiography, infrared reflectography, and multiband reflectography are also employed. In May 2017, Ms. Modestini received a Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa, from Fairfield University. Her book, Masterpieces on the Life and Work of Mario Modestini, was published in 2018. So this introduction was just to give you a sense of the incredibly illustrious career that Professor Modestini has had, and put for you in the context what you are going to see in this absolutely wonderful documentary, where very much like a scientist, she had this moment of discovery. So I'm dying to ask her more about this when we are done with the film. But so I invite you all to enjoy watching this film and staying for the panel discussion afterward. Okay, so I would like to invite Dianne and Irma for the panel discussion. But before that, let me give you a brief introduction to Irma, who is our Susan Morse Hill's Chief Conservator at the Yale University Art Gallery. And she has had a very long and distinguished career in the field of conservation. She was trained at the prestigious, I'm not going to say it, my Italian is not good enough, in Florence, where she worked on a very important conservation projects involving paintings by Peter Paul Rubens. In 2000, she came to Yale as a guest conservator and then joined Yale fully in 2004. And she is the chief conservator, and I am delighted to have her to be in conversation with Dianne today. Please, welcome. Now, it's something to be seeing an image of this from Dianne's laptop. Yeah. So it's quite a treat. Thank you for that. I think the mics are working.
They're working?
Yes. So I think I'd like to give Irma the opportunity to ask a question or two before we open it up to the audience and continue.
Okay. So I have a question for you, which is if you
Can't hear you.
Yeah, you'll be closer to the mic, I think.
I think.
Is it on? Yeah, it is on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My question to you is if you had found the painting in a museum setting, and would you have changed your approach to conservation, and in particular to the reconstruction of the areas of losses? If you feel like in a museum setting, you would have like sort of approached things slightly differently, and if perhaps you would have used a sort of advisory committee to help that process prior to actually your restoration.
Well, it's a scenario that didn't happen, and that is very far from, I mean, it's just coming from a different direction. The museum owns a Leonardo da Vinci, and they decide to restore it. Yes, there's a committee and all of that, and, it's always would be nice to have that kind of advice. In terms of my restoration, I wouldn't do anything different. Yeah, it's there's you can't see it. I created this website, and you can go on it and see. There's an ultraviolet image of the painting, which shows my restorations and the original, and you can see that they can. In fact, I did an overlay. To check myself, and you can see that the retouching or the in-painting corresponds exactly with the areas of loss. And also a very important point is that the areas of loss are surrounded by passages of paint that are absolutely intact, that have all these thin layers of modeling. Which are, for the flesh tones, there are about 5 different very thin paint layers. And had that not been the case, if, as we say in conservation, all the paint had been slightly worn away, I wouldn't have been able to do that restoration. But I would have had to do something much more neutral. But because there were these adjoining areas that were so perfectly preserved, I felt that it was even almost necessary in order to make them read properly, to do the kind of restoration that I did.
I'm curious about something else. I'm a scientist, and we have these little moments of discovery. They may not be earth-shattering sometimes, just the joy of figuring things out for oneself. And of course, there's the dramatic eureka, whatever, that is associated with scientific discovery. I'm curious what emotional state you were in when it dawned on you, that moment when you thought you saw it was a Leonardo. What did it feel like?
Well, I had already, at that point, I had been working on it for quite a long time. And I knew that by that time I had all the art historical information about it. Martin Kemp had given his opinion. But I was still, for myself, not entirely convinced, or maybe not that. To the point where I could, put my life on the line and say, yes, I think this is by Leonardo. It's not by Luini. It's not by Boltraffio. It's, this can only be by Leonardo.
But did you suspect that at the first look already?
At the first look, no, I didn't, because first of all, this, was a period when my husband was very ill. I actually didn't want to work on the picture. I tried.
The provenance was a bit dodgy, right?
No, the provenance is actually not so, it's not.
Where it was procured first, resurfaced, right?
Oh, well,
New Orleans and this sort of obscure.
Yes. Eventually, of course, the Wall Street Journal traced
it out.
I mean, we knew that it was in the Cook collection.
Right.
So it's not that it didn't have any provenance. It's just that there's no provenance before 1900. But that's true of many, many pictures. So I didn't, in the beginning, I really, really didn't feel that I had the kind of time or energy to do it. And I was taking care of Mario, and he was not really not well at that stage. And it wasn't until I showed it to him and he reacted the way he did that I decided to take it on, because he hadn't.
It was clear he thought it was something serious, worthy of investigation.
Yes,
right?
in fact, he mentioned, he says, by a very great artist, a generation after Leonardo. Mario had studied extensively early Leonardo, which he knew really well. So this quite late Leonardo, in a way, is kind of something like the next generation.
Right.
So it kind of eventually all makes sense. But the fact that he responded to this, and he hadn't responded to anything, for almost a year. And I would try to show him paintings, show him catalogs, and he would just brush them away. So this was it was something. He took it in his hands, and he looked at it, for a very long time. And then, and he said, this is by a very great artist. And so I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm missing something. That
you should look harder and
yes, yeah.
work harder. We'd like to open up. We will continue the conversation, but if anyone has a pressing question, and the walking mic is behind you. We have young Fred.
I was just curious. So the provenance has been established through 1900, and then I guess a Wall Street Journal article will tell me how it got to the auction house in Louisiana and selling for 1,000.
Yeah, it's also on my website.
Okay, and did you know anything about the provenance of the damage to it? Could you analyze, like, there's splinters, so a piece of wood went through it, and how it got from being part of the king, like King Charles or whatever,
Yeah.
to being something that somebody stored somewhere.
It was a discard.
And it was vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It had the painting. It had an English cradle. A cradle is a kind of a wooden lattice that's glued to the back of a panel to keep it straight, and the type of cradle was definitely English. And I asked panel paintings restorer in London to confirm this, which he did, and then I also asked him if he had, because I've seen little, where there's a slight step. I've seen, a little bit of shaving down on pictures from time to time, but nothing like this, because someone had clearly taken a plane and just went right through the picture, taking off, original paint. It was a handyman, it was, and I asked them if they had seen anything like this. And they said they had seen it on Tudor portraits that from country houses. So that was just kind of one little clue that it had that it was in England in the late 18th, early 19th century still.
I think there was a question there.
Yes, thanks so much for joining us this evening, and especially for sharing your insights. Curious to know about the thumb print, whether it was analyzed, identified. What happened to the thumbprint?
It's not a thumbprint. It's a painted thumb.
Oh, okay. So I thought it was a print
No.
of the artist's.
No, there are some, fingerprints in some paintings by Leonardo. There are some in Ginevra. There's some in the St. Jerome in the Vatican, but there. This is what we call a pentimento, means a change of mind, and there are other changes in the painting, but they're all very slight, and they're. I've always wondered why he went to so much trouble to make some of the changes that he did, because it meant revising a whole part of the painting. He moved, with the hand holding the orb, he moved the hand slightly down and slightly to the left. And he moved the mantle so that he could put in 2 pieces of black, and this caused him to have to change the whole structure of the cross bands, those embroidered bands. And it's such a slight adjustment but it clearly meant a great deal to him. And this is why, it's another, I think, compelling reason for the attribution is that, and that he worked on it over a very long period of time, because if you compare it to, people often compare it to the St. John the Baptist in the Louvre, which was painted very quickly. It was painted practically all in one go, and it has these terrible contraction cracks where the paint slipped because the paint underneath it wasn't sufficiently dry. And and the Mona Lisa also has many contraction cracks. The Salvator Mundi has hardly any cracks at all of that type. In the paint layer, also the Belferronier has a series of very significant drying cracks. So it's and then from the cross sections you can see how thin the thin buildup of these layers of color. And from what I think, as far as I can tell from the Naples copy, which is I think the earliest one, he probably began to work on this picture before 1500 in Milan, and then continued to work on it in Florence, in Milan, in Rome, Milan again, in Rome, and in France. I think it had an extremely long gestation.
Oh, the mic. Okay,
Yes, I have it here.
Oh.
While the painting was in your possession, was it insured? If so, by whom? I mean, not the insurer, but who decided to do that? And for what, presumably, earthly amount did it start at
You know,
being insured?
I don't really know, because until it went to London, and it was, well, at least Robert Simon felt that he had enough art historical opinion to say that it was by Leonardo. I have no idea what he insured it for. After that, I think, in fact, he said that the insurance was becoming very costly, and that's one of the reasons they brought a partner in. And anyway, but I have no idea what they insured it for.
I was curious, actually, as you were doing the restoration, like the NYU faculty from the art history department or students, were they sort of like coming to sort of like look and offer advice or provide opinions?
No, I worked on it usually on weekends, or I would begin in the late afternoon and work on it in the evening. The only colleague that I asked to look at it is Dorothy Mann. It wasn't the. I just needed to work it out for myself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think the mic is here. Sure. Can throw it. It's a soft.
Oh, I see.
Take me out before I can ask a question. I guess my question, I have two questions. In the film, they talk about the best conservator in the world, etc. And I wanted to know what makes someone, as a conservator, the best conservator.
Oh, that was just silly.
I know, but I just
they just made that up,
well, I just want
It's
your
just
thought about what makes a good conservator, and I also, in order to be thought of, so what would esteem a conservator, and also I was wondering how you felt like when you were doing the retouching, you separated yourself from the hand of the artist and yourself. I mean, I'm an objects conservator, and my first real knowledge of in-painting techniques are from Irma, who uses a very a visible in-painting technique, which I feel like I understand her approach in separating her own technique from the techniques of the artist. And I was wondering what your approach was to your in-painting.
Well, I tried to imitate the entire layer structure, working in myself in very thin layers. For example, in the flesh tones, the first Leonardo's first layer is a very deep hot pink, so I underpainted it with that, and then it was just a kind of series of, very thin glazes and scumbles, and then editing. I was constantly, taking off what I had put in and sort of paring it down a bit, and which also burnished it until to make sure that it hadn't gone outside the limits. But that it was, that's all. Actually, that's how I work always, anyway. So.
I was just curious how, if you're imitating their techniques, or, I mean, it sounds like you're imitating what was built up on, rather than, creating something like a visual reconstruction rather than like a technical reconstruction.
I don't understand
And
what
the
you mean.
difference, yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of like how, for example, as I said, mostly when I'm thinking about like if you look at it up close, would you be able to tell your brushstrokes from Leonardo's brushstrokes? Whereas if you would look up close at something that's done with
Yeah.
Irma's technique, for example, I can see that there are tiny lines, but like if I step, I really have to look through it, but if I step away, it comes together as a complete picture.
I see
And I'm
what.
wondering.
No, you would have to be very, very close to the picture, indeed, to be able to see them.
To see your.
Yes.
But you can tell which is.
Well, I have this ultraviolet image, which is part of the documentation.
Oh, absolutely. I just
Yeah.
mean for the viewer to see when they're interacting with the
I don't work that way. Yeah.
It's just a different, style
yeah.
and technique, right?
Yeah, it's a different approach, and I've
Approach,
always,
Mm.
it's kind of an Italian approach,
Yeah.
and I've always, in all my training from the very beginning, I've always worked in this way to try to imitate the adjacent original as quickly as as well as possible. But there are all sorts of different problems that come up with every picture. As I said, this particular painting had perfectly preserved passages of original next to losses which this carpenter or whoever worked on it had planed right down to the wood. So I could have that was the I say that was the only reason I could do it. It's not but and if you have different kind of picture, the different kind of damage, something that's extremely abraded, where you sort of work all to tone down little losses all over the picture until you get something that's more cohesive, but it's just it changes with every with every picture. There's not a formula that you can just say, oh, this is what you do. But I mean, I have a formula for my materials.
Right. So actually, that's a question I have for you when you were talking about the sort of the 5 layers. Is the chemical composition of the pigments, are we able to, this is a naive question, are we able to completely reproduce the compositions that he might have used now?
No, because for one thing, we don't use lead white.
Right.
And I don't know. Of course, it can be poisonous, but I think that I would be afraid that the medium that I use wouldn't bind it well enough so that it wouldn't react with the atmosphere and blacken.
Right.
So instead,
So potential damage, so you're very worried about that.
so
Right.
instead, most conservators use titanium oxide, the rutile form, crystal form, which is stable. It's not as opaque as lead white, and there are colors that you can't use.
Because they probably had organic pigmentation, right? Which is
There are some colors that
Yeah.
faded, that that you can't use. There are some, there are certain colors that alter, like realgar or piment that so you have to substitute materials that are stable.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh,
There's one
question
more
right there.
question, yeah.
So I believe I noticed two different frames on the painting.
Yeah.
Can you tell
Two
me anything
frames,
about
different
that? Was
Well,
the
you know, they-
original really fancy one like out of period or
Yeah.
fake
Well,
or
they did.
plastic?
You know, a lot of this of this filming, they were reenactments.
Right.
So, the painting, the frame that was on the painting when they sold it, which is at it's this frame, yeah. Obviously, they didn't have any more, but Robert Simon still had the frame that had been on it when he bought it, which was the frame that was on it when it was in the Cook collection, because it still had the inventory numbers of the Cook collection on the back of it. So, so that's what the frame. So that the gold frame that you see,
Yeah.
that's the Cook collection frame.
So I was curious, sort of the chemistry of the reconstruction of these colors. Like, I would like to hear a little bit more.
Well, so in terms of reconstruction of areas of losses, well, I would say in Italy we have a tendency to use a visible in-painting technique for loss, for loss compensation. It's a theory that was developed in the late 1930s, early 40s by Cesare Brandi, who's to be considered the father of the Italian theory of restoration, of modern theory of restoration, where he and the Mora, Paolo and Laura Mora, developed this technique that is called tratteggio, where you use vertical lines, you juxtapose and you superimpose pure colors, or you max of two colors, and you create this grid. And the whole point is to hold back the personality of the conservator. So you're reconstructing, like, almost that there is like some sort of filter between the work of art and the conservator, and that your reconstruction is visible and judgeable, so that when you
So there's a separation that's inbuilt
build
as
basic,
the
it
so
holds back
the
that sort of,
gaze. The gaze should be able to discern.
yes,
Is
when
that
you're
sort of
close
what
up,
you
yeah.
were alluding to?
So
Okay.
when you're close up,
Yeah.
you see the area of loss. You can
Okay.
recognize and judge the work of the conservator. When you're far away, you don't. So you basically value you try to balance the historical value of the work of art by not imposing your own work, and then from an aesthetic point of view, you still allow the work of art to be appreciated, because
And to
it's
be
sort of
also made whole, right? I mean,
Yeah.
part of the challenge, different ways
Yeah.
of
Yes.
looking at it,
Yeah.
is what way do you want to make this thing whole and back
Yes,
to
and how you let the artist be the predominant
dominant
voice,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and not the restorer.
Sort of,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
So
and
there's-
and there are sort of various ways of thinking about that and doing it.
But I love
And-
the sort of there's a detective aspect to all of this, which I have to admit,
Conservation.
to
Oh.
conservation in general,
Yeah.
sort of trying to figure out, what was Leonardo thinking? Like, why did he change his mind, right?
Why did he change
his mind? That's the
Well, I'm
Yeah,
actually.
question.
I don't know if how many scientists there are here, but
I see several.
okay, yeah. So the orb is something that has been very much discussed. Art historians,
It's actually a rendering of the globe
yes,
of the world.
yeah. Yes, I think it's meant to be the cosmos.
Mhm.
I would love to have a long discussion with you about this
That's
sometime.
right. Yeah, yes.
That it's supposed to be the cosmos, and because the whole painting has to do with eternity
And
and time, and at the lower right on the bottom, there
Is
you
a
can't see
shiny
them very
gold
well,
flecks,
but you
yeah.
can see these little dots.
Yeah.
And a geologist, that
Stefan
crystallographer,
Nicolescu.
he gave up on it.
Oh, he did.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but it was, and they had sort of had a fight, and so the other one was Juan Garcia Ruiz has kept on with this, and he's these are the little white dots are. He's absolutely convinced are fluid inclusions in the crystal.
Ah, okay.
And not, some art historians insist that they're air bubbles.
I see.
And he says, no, it's not. They're absolutely, and this is quartz crystal.
Right.
And he's hesitated to publish this because it has a lot of implications for the history of crystallography,
Right.
because it would make Leonardo the first person to have observed and studied crystals
As well.
as
I mean,
well
yes,
as all
I
the
mean,
other
it's
things he
on
did.
top of everything
Yeah.
else that he did, right? Yes. No, but
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. It hadn't occurred to me until you just pointed out that I think what's very interesting, I don't know a whole lot about the actual solid orbs, but I do know about the maps, the versions of the universe, the way the sort of the cartographic, one-dimensional representations. So it'll be very interesting to see if this kind of maps on to some other rendering of the cosmos
It would.
from that time.
And of course, it's the only part that's well preserved are where the inclusions are,
Yeah.
and the rest of it is very abraded. But there are those 3 white dots,
Yeah.
which are original, and that must signify something.
Looks like the Pleiades, but I don't want to be quoted
Yeah.
on that. But
Yeah. Someone suggested that it was. Oh, what is it? Some triangle.
yeah, that's
of
the Pleiades.
of constellations that
Patience,
was
yeah.
only discovered by Amerigo Vespucci or something like that. It was can't remember the name of them now.
So, there
but
is
it's
this
yeah.
rendering of one of the earliest renderings in the Western world that survived. Is called the Nebra Sky Disk, and it's actually a copper plate, and it has the Pleiades, and it has the sun and the moon. And we don't know what it was used for or whatever, but it's very curious. Yeah, worth.
Yeah.
We should have an offline conversation, not geek
Yeah.
out on the possibilities of which constellation it might be.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I was also very curious, right? That there is a real difference in the blues, right? On the fabric, the shroud and the folds, and that orb. I mean, there is a very clear outline, right, where the orb sort of ends and the.
Yes, there is a. If you would look
Darker.
at the clean state, you'd
Mm.
have to see. I did just some work with watercolor. You could see the edge
Okay.
just to define it, but what should happen, and you can sort of see it, but it's damaged. Is that the drapery seen through the orb should be magnified?
Right. That's where I was going. I was going
Yeah.
about whether this was actually a glass orb or is it actually agate or something else.
Yes.
You know what I mean? If it's opaque material.
Yes.
And I think it's meant to be transparent, translucent, right? Because I think you're seeing the fold of the drapery.
I think so.
But
It's damaged because there's a painting. There's a Salvator Mundi by Dürer in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's unfinished, and he also has an orb, and because it's not finished, you can see very clearly that the drapery folds are magnified behind the orb.
so
It's
what
very
time
well,
are we talking
very
about?
well preserved. About the same time. Yeah.
So they were definitely grinding glass at that point and making lenses in the Netherlands. So Galileo gets it in 1602. And before that, there are these spy glasses, and they already knew how to grind lenses very well. Turns out that Spinoza was one of a master lens. The Spinoza was a master lens grinder, actually. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is, I say that it's
So I mean, when I saw this, so I saw this documentary sometime in the summer. It's on Netflix, by the way. And to me, as a layperson, not a professional in this field, but kind of obsessed with art in general and in love with it, what clinched it for me was the observation that you made about the lip. Mona Lisa's lip, or the lack of the lip, as it were, right?
Yeah.
And so is that, was that for you also somewhat convincing?
Yes. Yeah, because I was having such a hard time with that. It's still not right. But, that is, and it's, because it's just like blowing smoke, that is that transition. So,
Irma, what do you
Yeah.
think of the lip? Mona Lisa's lip versus Salvator Mundi's lip.
I think it's for me it's very hard because I actually haven't seen the painting in person.
Yeah.
So I in one sense I would have loved to have that sort of one-on-one or close up.
Yeah.
Since for me actually the question of the lip brings another question. It's like, how do you read art through areas of loss? Because that is the biggest problem, is like, and to sort of like consider loss as such like elements of noise, and that we sort of want to block them, and so how do you get those moments of like, oh, I can recognize the hand of one artist or another one through those fragments of colors. And I think, and at least here we have so many students, fellows, and interns that come in, and one of the, great aspect is to give them that sort of close looking and teaching them how to actually go beyond those areas of damage and really focus on those.
But but I think one thing is quite clear, that at the end of the day, there is a lot of subjectivity.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Just, you have the best equipment,
Yeah.
you have the data,
Yeah.
but and it is it's something that is highly subjective, right? That is very clear.
Restoration is subjective.
And I have to admit that I did see that Leonardo exhibit in London, but all the drama about the painting came after.
Yes.
So when I saw it, it didn't even occur to me that it may or may not, whatever, because I was one of the crowd who thought, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
And so it's been fascinating.
Yeah. That it all the drama erupted.
Yeah.
When Christie's.
Yes.
Uh,
I guess when
So
when money
dashed.
got entangled with it is when I guess a lot of
Although
things
some people like Jerry Falk, Jerry Salk, he's very
Salk.
funny.
yeah.
He's extremely funny, but anyway, he got all upset about it when they made the attribution at the London exhibition. Yeah.
Vision.
And also Jacques Franck and there. But anyway, it didn't reach that, didn't have that fever pitch until
Yeah.
it was sold.
Yeah. So one final question before we head out to the reception. Yeah, there's a question in the back.
I actually would think that the was it pentimento was that your discovery would kind of ensure that it wasn't an original, because a copyist who's a protege who can paint that well wouldn't paint what they're seeing wrong.
Exactly.
Yes,
And
exactly.
And a forger could do it to make it really look authentic, but has that ever happened where a forger has actually painted in the pentimentos as well as the final product?
Probably.
Okay.
Probably some of them are so clever,
Okay, yeah.
but it is. I said it's very telling. But when you're talking about an attribution to Leonardo,
Yeah.
that's the thing. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a pentiment, but still could have been by Luini or somebody else. So, yeah.
So anyway, let's thank Dianne again and Irma for being part of this